We are discussing today. A part where I talk about Zapffe and the shared tragedy of everything alive in the last main chapter of the book on evolution. What I was trying to accomplish in this part is I was trying to present two readings, conventional reading and alternative reading of Zapffe theory. In a similar way, we were talking about two readings of Nietzsche and Lacan last time. That is the first one, first more conventional reading that distinguishes humans from other animals, presenting humans as something different from the natural order because they have the luck, which they're constituted around the luck, which we can call death drive, the repetition of the luck. And the animals in this conventional perspective are different. They don't have the death drive. Nothing is wrong with them. And this is how we see conventionally nature, as harmonious, as not death driven. And I would like, and one can use Zapfe's theory to prove this kind of conventional position, but one always normally does. So Zapffe is one of those philosophers who would be, if ever mentioned, because he's not that popular, because he's too pessimistic. But if one mentions Zapffe, it's normally to show how humans are tragic creatures, disastrous creatures, which presupposes that the rest of the nature is better. But one can also do. I can also do something else, that is present the alternative reading of Zapffe when he's actually showing that humans are tragic, death-driven creatures, but it's not contrasting them to the rest of the nature, but precisely showing, or maybe in this alternative reading, Zapffe is showing how through this luck, through being death-driven, through the sickness that humans represent, they're actually included in nature. Through the rupture in themselves, they are a part of nature, because nature itself, including animals, all the animals and all the creatures alive, are constituted through, is death-driven, one could say, and constituted through the luck. So Zapffe does talk about humans as a biological paradox or abnormality, absurdity. And for him, what distinguishes humans, the human kind of failure or kind of the mistake that nature does in creating humans, is the abnormally developed, overly developed consciousness. And this is what makes human death-driven. The depression for Zapffe, as you remember, is a normal state of human existence. It's not the deviation. Deviation would be happiness and health, not the deviation, but happiness and health is rather masked natural state. Natural state would be desire, for humans would be desire to die. But also he interestingly mentions when this consciousness awakens, what humans feel, except for anxiety and depression, they also feel a brotherhood of suffering between everything alive. And this is important for me. So from this perspective, one can say it and one can use it the way Zapffe characterizes human. One can use to prove the perspective that we are different from animals, because we have overly developed consciousness. And one can also find proofs of this position in Zapffe when he would talk about animals as suffering adequately without any abnormality, not too much, and which presupposes that humans suffer too much, that there's absurdity of human suffering while other animals suffer adequately to the circumstances of their existence. So one can prove this point where humans are different from animals, relying on Zapffe. But one can also take a different direction, and one could claim or find in Zapffe proofs for a different perspective, where nature is tragic itself, and nature is as such a mistake. It functions as a mistake, and human overly developed consciousness is just one of the instances of this mistake. So again, those lines, this position can be proved relying on Zapffe, that it's he would also claim that it's not only reduced to humans, but not only confined to humankind, but there are other species, for example, those deers, Irish deers, that now are extinct, who have overly developed horns, and those mutations. And he also emphasizes that mutations are blind, the blind force, and this is going to be important for us to discuss next time, the blindness of mutations. So it's not, this is the proof that it's not only human mutation that is deadly, but there are other creatures. There's something else in other creatures, some kind of mutations that brings them to extinction, brings them to death. And at the same time, Zapffe would claim makes them beautiful, but this mutation is deadly. He would compare deer horns with human depression, like specific mistake that humans embody, the depression, overly developed consciousness, and deer horns, because he would claim that it both brings those creatures brings them down in the same way and kills them. There's some mistake that constitutes us, depression in humans and overly developed horns in deers, then brings them down to earth and destroys them. And this is what defines them. So we can use this this example as proof that humans are not substantially different from other creatures. There's some in every creature. There's something that destroys them, and in the end, there's some kind of mutations. And mutations, they're non-normality. Mutations are not opposite of normality. Mutations are just the form of variability, of the changeability. It's not that some creatures are mutated or have mutations and some don't have mutations. It's even questionable if we can call mutations adaptational and disadaptational. So deer horns, those deers and humans, can be seen as just embodiment of different mistakes of nature, or of nature that functions as a mistake. And this specific mistake at the same time defines the creature and brings them to their own death and distinction. So I was saying something like it, that it's not consciousness that is constitute human. Consciousness does not constitute human exception. It does, but not in the way that we are exemption that we are different in a way that we are mistake of nature. It's just what constitutes us is a different kind of mistake that constitutes other creatures, because in every creature there is some kind of mutation that sooner or later will bring them to their end, because 99.9% of creatures, species that existed, they extinct. So all of them at some points are going to extinct. And there's something inside of them, some internal factors or external factors that will bring to this end. And one can say that this is the specific way particular species are death-driven, and coming to the ending can be seen as the defining feature, not the contrary, not the way each species is adapted. So it can be seen the other way around, not the adaptation, not the perspective that there is certain kind of adaptational features that define creatures, but on the contrary, the mutations that bring creatures in a specific, their own unique way to their extinction or to their death can be seen as something that defines this creature. Zapffe would also claim that, I can claim that we normally perceive depression as within the therapeutic discourse as a specific feature, a subjective feature, something in our mind that sets, confined within us subjectively, that sets a certain feeling, negative feeling also, and certain deviated perception of the world. And this would be the definition of depression. And from this point, the conventional definition of depression, from this point, we can say that this can be perceived as some kind of the deviation that human has. It's just specifically painful way of subjective existence, because depression is perceived as subjective feature, subjective perception of the world, the subjective feeling. It's within individual. But one can also question it, this definition of depression, and say that it's not distorted perception of the world. It's not confined within individual. It is what you feel, but it also can be not the distortion, but actually adequate perception of the world. And if it's adequate perception of the world, mean this is the world, nature talking in you, or manifesting itself through you. And in this way, so it is subjective, but if it's adequate instead of inadequate, the way we normally think it is, because it doesn't feel good. So we have hope that the world is amazing, harmonious, and there's something wrong with us, and we are perceiving the world when we're depressed in a distorted way. But if it's not distorted, if it's actually it is subjective, but it's adequate, then it is world within you that manifests itself through depression. So in this way, it would be inclusion through, for Zapffe, what characterizes humans, this lack, the rupture, in Zapfe's words, would be depression, right? There's the specific features that human have that distinguishes them from nature, or at the same time, we can say includes them in nature. If this is depression, the rupture, the mistake in a form that humans don't want to exist. So it at the same time excludes them from nature, may be abnormal, but at the same time, through this feeling, it is a feeling that includes them into nature. Let the world speak through you in your depression. Just the opposite, what I'm suggesting here is the opposite perception, that depression might be not distorted perception of reality, and not just subjective perception of reality, but disappearance of you, where only pain of the world that defines the world remains, something like it. And next time we will talk in more scientific terms, but about the same matter, that the world, not only humans, can be seen as tragic creatures, but the world as such as a death-driven or destructive process, and evolution as a destructive process, and humans are just through being destructive, it just belong to the world instead of being excluded from the world. So basically the same thing, but in more scientific and smart terms. And if you have questions, I'll stop recording this and ask you.